Hey everybody, Johnny here. In this video, we're going to revisit one of my older videos where we created a timer like this in Blender. Hopefully this version is going to give you some new ideas and simplify the process quite a bit. So without any further ado, let's jump right into it. So to get started with this one, we're just going to simply add a geometry node tree to our default cube. So I'll pull up this section here and change it to a geometry node editor. I'll click new to create a new node tree. Now for this timer, we won't need any of the original geometry. So we're just going to cut this line here, and we can move the group input a little out of the way. To access the time, we're going to use the scene time node, and that gives us access to the number of seconds that have passed. Now to change these seconds into text, we simply need to drag this to a value to string node, and we're going to change the type to integer. Now to be able to display these, we will simply drag out from the string here and do a string to curves node and hook that to our geometry. Jump into top view here, and we have our initial view of our seconds. So if I hit play, you see we get those. Now right off the bat, to make this look better, I'm going to go into my string to curves node and choose a different font. Now I'm on Windows, and so the font I'm going to choose for this is Courier. And I'll just do Courier New Bold. The reason I'm choosing a Courier font is that Courier fonts are monospaced. That means that every character, no matter what it is, whether it's a period or the letter M or whatever, all take up the same amount of horizontal space. So if you're creating something like a clock display that has like fixed digits, or if you've got a font that's like a segmented digit display, you're going to want those to maintain the same width. So that if the time is 111, it's not really narrow, and then if it's 524, it's really wide. So you want them to stay spaced evenly. So I'll choose Courier New, and now we have this. Because we're going to want to be able to go to lots of different lengths of time here, I'm going to adjust my render frame range settings here. I'm just going to set this to a really high number, and then I'm going to split this window and change it to a timeline. That way I can scrub through really easily. And I'm going to do a control middle mouse drag here. So now I can scrub through this. The next thing we want to do is we want to make sure that our seconds don't go beyond 59. So you'll see here, if I get up to the high 50s, it just continues on because the number of seconds is doesn't take hours or minutes or anything like that into consideration. It's just the number of seconds that have passed. So we're going to need to constrain this from 0 to 59. Anytime you want to do that with an integer, the easiest way to do that is using the modulo operator. You can think of the modulo operator as just a remainder operator. So for instance, if we take a number like 60, because we've got 60 seconds in a minute, and we divide a number like 10 by 60, well, 60 goes into 10 0 times, but it also has a remainder of 10. So modulo 10 modulo 60 is a value of 10. But if we get all the way up to 60, it goes into it one time with no remainder. So that would be 0. So you can see that that is going to roll over like that. So what I'll do is I'll take my seconds here and I'm going to add an integer math node. I'll connect that in and change the mode here to modulo. And the modulo value that I want is 60. So if I return to frame 0 and let this play, pull this up here, let's go up to, there we go. So now we're reaching to 55. So now this is going from 0 to 59. So we're another step closer. But if you're making some kind of display, some kind of digital, like digital clock or countdown timer or whatever, you're probably going to want to have an even number of digits always displayed, so that when it's 5 seconds, it's displayed as 05. So there's always 2 digits of seconds being displayed. So let's see how we could do that. First, I'll spread this out a bit because we want to take our modulo value here, 0 to 59, and we want to add a 0 in front of it if the value is less than 10. I'm going to use some string functions to do this. So if I take the string now, this is no longer a value. This is just the characters, like 0 through 9, and there might be more than one. So if we take this and we use a join strings node, and we don't want to use any delimiter, so that means nothing is going to be put between the strings we add. And then we also add in a string node with just the string 0, and we add that before the strings here. So now if we scrub through our time, we can see now that we get 2 digits starting with a 0 if we're below 10, but as soon as we get to 10 and above, we get 3 digits. So what we want to do is capture the last 2 characters of this string. So when it is below 10, we're getting 05 here, but when it's greater than 10, we capture the last 2 and we get 41. So in order to do this, we will simply go into our utilities, text, and we're going to use the node slice string. Now what slice string does is it lets us pick a position within the string and choose how many characters beyond that position we want to return. So if I add this in right now, it starts at 0, which is the beginning of the string, and gives us 10 characters. So if I take this down to 2 characters, we see we get the first 2 characters of the string, which is fine when the value is below 10, but you'll see as soon as we get above 10, we're still just getting those first 2 characters. We're not getting the second and third character, which is what we want. So we need to adjust this position. What we're really looking for is the position that's 2 less than the end of the string. So if I get the length of the string using the string length node, and then I subtract 2, and I plug that into the position, now you'll see I'm getting those last 2 characters no matter how many characters are in the string. Now in the future, if we're looking at fractional seconds, we might want to look at milliseconds, which are reported in 3 characters rather than in 2. So what we could do here is we could add additional zeros to this string here. And now you see this didn't change the string at all, because all of these are just adding to the beginning of the string. And this slice is just always taking the last 2 characters. So now we could have up to this many zeros at the beginning of our string, and we could pad out to those. So here's what we're going to do. Since we're going to want to reuse this padding function, we're going to select all these nodes and press Ctrl-G to group them. And now we're also going to want to be able to control how many characters we are returning. So I'm going to drag an input here to this value that we're subtracting, how far back in the string we want to get, and then also how many characters we want. So we're just going to use this again. And then let me just clean this up a little bit. So we're going to call this node 0 padding. The first input is our value that we want to 0 pad, which is an integer. And then here is the number of characters we want to actually pad out to. What we'll do is we'll change this to type integer, and we'll call it pad length. And we're going to set the default value of our pad length to 2. So if I go out to my main node tree, you'll see because I had initially connected this to a 0, this is set to 0. So I'm just going to bump this up to 2. And we can see this is padding now. and we have 0, 0 to 59. So that takes care of our seconds. So now let's take a look at minutes. For minutes, we can follow a very similar process. But first, we need to determine how many minutes have passed based on the number of seconds that have passed. So if we divide the number of seconds by 60 and then throw out any remainder, we will get the number of minutes that have passed. So I'm going to duplicate this modulo node, and I'm going to change it to divide. With the integer division, this is going to throw out any remainder. So that means if only 10 seconds have passed and we divide that by 60, we just get 0. 0 minutes have passed. We will divide our seconds by 60, and this will be the number of minutes. Now, just like the seconds, we want to pad this out to 2 characters. Lucky for us, we've created a 0 padding node. So I'm just going to duplicate this, bring it down, and connect in my minutes. Now, for the sake of our timer, I'm going to add in a colon between the minutes and the seconds. So I'll add a new join string node, and I'll connect the minutes here above the seconds. And just for clarity on my nodes, I'm just going to rearrange these. So now these are my minutes, these are my seconds. And the delimiter I'm going to use is a colon. So if I go back to 0 here, I can scrub through and see what I've got. And so that's looking pretty good. But once we get up here, you see that my minutes are going past 59, which is fine if that's what you are looking for, but that's not really what we're going for here. We want to have hours be kind of the unconstrained number, and minutes still be constrained to 0 to 59. We can accomplish this in the exact same way we did it with our seconds, by doing a modulo 60. So I'll simply duplicate the modulo 60 node and move it up to the minutes. And we see now that this is also constrained from 0 to 59. Now doing the hours is very similar to doing the minutes. So we'll want to divide our seconds. And how many seconds are in an hour? Well, there's 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour, so it's 60 times 60. Now, for those of you who are good at fast math, you might go, oh, that's 3,600. If that's not your forte, one of the beauties of any of these entry boxes in nodes is that you can do a math calculation right here. So I can say 60 times 60, and I get my 3,600. So just like minutes, this is going to throw out any additional seconds from 0 to 35.99 and just give us the integer result of that division. Since our clock is going to have 2 digits for the hours, we're also going to want to pad out our hours. So I'll duplicate our padding and add that in. So as you can see here, this now rolls over nicely between 59.59 and 1 hour. And if I scrub this through, you can see that this works pretty well. You might want your clock to start at a given time and run up from there at the start of your animation. So maybe you're already at 10 hours in and you want that to continue on, but you don't want to have a million frames in your render. Well, this is quite possible to do. So we're going to come back here and give this a more reasonable ending frame. Let's say 500. So we're going to want to be able to put an offset on our time so that we can start really at any time we'd like. So to do that, I simply need to add a value from the input of our geometry node. I'll add an add node here and drag in a value from our group input. Opening up my end panel here, I'm going to change that to time offset. So now with this time offset, I can change this to really whatever I want. And if I want to take this up to something way beyond the number of frames Blender would allow, I can do that. So here I've gotten it all the way up to 89 hours and I'm at frame 0. Now, if you want to have this be more like a day clock that goes from 0 to 12 or 0 to 24, you could simply add in this modulo node up to the hours and give it the number of hours that you would want to roll over at. So if I wanted this to be a 12-hour clock, I could set the modulo to 12. And you can see here that as I reach 12 o'clock, it goes back to 0, 0, and 3 seconds. If I wanted it to be a 24-hour clock, I could simply change the modulo to 24, and we're going to get the same thing. So I can also add this modulo to my group input. And we're going to call this hour cutoff. So if you have this at 12, you'd have like a 12-hour clock. If you'd have this at 24, you'd have a 24-hour clock. Or you could put this up, extremely high, and then it's just going to keep counting up. So as I was editing this video, I realized I left something out. So I wanted to interject that right now. And that is, if you are running this as a timer, where the timer starts or ends at 0, the tutorial up to this point covers that. So when the seconds is 0, your timer is all zeros. But if you want to create a clock and you're running this on 12-hour time, you never have a all zeros time. So we need to make an adjustment to the hours calculation if you're wanting to do a 12-hour clock. Now, I had to look up a formula to be able to do this. I did not come up with this out of my own head. So let's jump in and see what we would have to change to make all zeros be 12 o'clock, like midnight, and then go to 1 a.m. after that hour is done. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into this node that we've been creating, this timer text. And right here, we have our hour calculation. So we're taking the number of hours generated by our seconds, moduloing it by whatever we put in as our hour cutoff. So we're going to want to add a switch here to say if we're working on 12-hour time or not. I'll add a switch node and set the type to integer. And we will have, and we'll drag an input to the switch here. And this is going to be 12-hour time. So if 12-hour time is false, we just want to use what we've already created. But if it's true, we're going to need to do something else to our numbers. And the formula we want to use for that starts again with our hours. Then we're going to duplicate this integer math node and set it to add. And we want to add 11. Then we will duplicate this again, and we want to modulo by 12. And then we want to add 1 to that. And we'll connect that to true here. So now if I turn on 12-hour time, you'll see that when we're at 0, we're at 12. And now let's bump up 60 minutes forward. So we'll bump forward 3,600 seconds. And you can see we go from 12:59 to 1 o'clock. So if we go to 12 hours and go to 12 times 3,600 and back up just a little, you can see we go from 11:59 to 12. If we go back off of 12-hour time and we back up, we get the same thing. But if we go back to 0, we start at 0, all zeros. So this switch would allow you to go from being a pure timer that starts or ends at 0 and a 12-hour clock that starts at 12, goes to 1, and then rolls over at 12. So Back to the video. So if you put the hours over 99, it's still going to have the effect of having it be at 100 unless you change the padding on your hours. So if I changed the padding of my hours to 3, now I could go beyond 100 hours and it would show here. And maybe that's something you want to be able to change on your modifier. So let's go ahead and add that into our modifier as well. And we'll call this our digits. Next, what about milliseconds? The scene time seconds does contain fractional seconds, so we could go ahead and add those in as well. The process is going to be very similar. So we're going to need to decide here first if we want our time offset to still only affect the number of seconds, or do we want to be able to add and subtract fractional seconds from that as well. For the sake of this, let's go ahead and change it so that our time offset can handle fractional seconds. First, we'll come to our time offset here in our group sockets and change this to float so that we can handle decimals. Next, we used an integer math node here before, and we're going to want to change that to be able to handle the floating point values as well. So I'm going to add in a regular math node. So now we can add fractional seconds. Now we want from this to generate our milliseconds. So first, we want to just get the fractional part of our float value. So if we take this down here and add a math node, we want math fraction. And what the fraction method in the math node does is it just returns the fractional part of a floating point value. Since we're going to want to look at milliseconds, we're going to need 3 digits for the milliseconds. So this value, say our time is 1.106 seconds, this is going to return 0.106. And this value will never go to 1. It'll always stay below 1. So we need to convert this into something that our padding node can understand. And we want milliseconds here. So that is thousandths of a second. And so we're going to want 3 digits. And so if we simply take this value and make it into a 3-digit integer, then we can use that. So to do that, we can simply multiply this value by 1000. So if it's 0, it'll be 0. If it's 0.5, it will be 500. If it's 0.999, it will be 999. So we can use this with our padding node. And here we're going to set the pad length to 3. And we're going to connect this in. Now, if you prefer your milliseconds to actually just be a period here rather than a colon, we can simply create another join strings with a period delimiter and connect our milliseconds here. You may or may not want to have milliseconds show up on this clock. So we can simply add in a switch node that either adds in or not the milliseconds. So I'm going to add in a switch node. I'll change the type to string. And we're going to want our switch to be show milliseconds. So I'm going to duplicate my group input and bring it over. And I'll change this to show milliseconds. Now, if show milliseconds is false, I simply want to take the output of my original 3 sections and send that through. If it's true, I want to take that, join in my milliseconds, and send that out. One thing, if you are reusing a bunch of group inputs and you're only using one of the outputs of that, if you press Control H, that will hide all of your unused sockets. So that makes it easy to use it in a situation like this, and it isn't quite so messy. Next, you may want your timer to be counting down instead of counting up. So to do that, we need to have whatever value we want to count down from. So instead of just adding the offset and the current frame number to give us our time, we'll use that and subtract it from some kind of starting point and have that be our time. So again, we're going to want this to be a switch. And this time it's going to be a float switch. We'll connect in our switch here, and we'll call this countdown. So if countdown is false, we just want to use the value that we've already created because we're counting up instead of counting down. If we are counting down, we're going to need a value to count down from. So here in our group sockets, I'm going to add an input, and we'll call that countdown from. And then we will simply take our countdown from and subtract our calculated value. And then that will be the true input for our switch. So I'm going to set my time offset to 0. I'll turn on countdown, and I'm going to count down from 5 minutes. So I'll just put in 5 times 60. And if I play my animation now, you'll see that I'm getting a countdown. I can clean up my node tree a little bit by duplicating my group input and reconnecting some of these pieces. Now, if you were going to be reusing this node and you wanted to have a little more control over it, I would probably encapsulate this node and get rid of the string to curves so that this node was really just outputting a string. So I'm going to delete my string to curves here, delete my geometry output, and then just connect up this string output. So you can't apply this directly to a piece of geometry anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the fake user button here to save this, and I'm going to call this timer text, and I'm going to delete this geometry node from my object. Now if I add a modifier, geometry nodes, and then I add in my timer text group here and do string to curves, I now very simply have all of my options for my timer text and all of my options for my string to curve, including my fonts and stuff, because I can't control the font from outside of the geometry node. So having all of this text logic encoded all in this one node, and then having all of my character and text options right here makes this a lot easier. The only other thing I can see immediately that we could clean up with this is if I select my timer text node and tab into it. It doesn't need a geometry input because it doesn't use it. So now I have just the options that I need here, and you can see that that works pretty well. As a special aside as well, if you get these source files from my Patreon, I've taken this node a little bit further. And as you can see here in the timer text version 2, you have the option to show or hide seconds. And also I've added another node here called Meridium that outputs AM or PM based on seconds. So the timer text will output the adjusted seconds, and then you can feed that into this node. Then you'll get a true or false, whether it's PM, and then an output that is AM or PM. So here I've simply connected AM or PM to another string to curves, joined that in with my geometry, and now I get a nice AM PM as well. So like I said, this is available on The source file's on my Patreon. If you download the project from there, you will get both the node that we discussed in the video, and you'll get the version 2 that I did after the video. So that's it for this video. I hope this gives you the information you need to generate the timers that you want for your Blender scenes. The source file for this is available over on my Patreon. The link will be down in the description. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and I hope it inspires you to make something awesome. And until next time, I'll catch you later.